The woman in the wheelchair didn't see it coming. Nobody did. That's the thing about moments like that. They don't announce themselves. 1 second, the arrivals hall at Vancouver International Airport is just noise and movement, and the smell of recycled air and Tim Hortons coffee. The next second, a wheelchair is on its side, a woman is on the floor, and 100 people are standing very still, not sure what they just witnessed. The man in the corner saw all of it. He'd been sitting there for 40 minutes, his back against the wall the way he always sat, never with his back to a door, never facing away from an entrance. Force of habit. 12 years of it. His carry-on was between his feet and his left hand beside a large German shepherd, who lay flat, ears up, watching the same room with the same calm attention his handler gave everything. The dog's name was Ghost. The man's name was Caden. Nobody in Terminal D knew either of those names yet, and that was fine. Caden had 14 days of leave, first in almost 2 years. His CO had practically ordered him to take it. Go somewhere, Quinn. Do something that isn't this. So he'd booked a flight to Kelowna, where his younger sister lived with her husband and their 2 kids, and he'd brought Ghost, because Ghost went where he went, always, and because his sister's kids had been asking about the dog since the last video call 6 months ago. He wasn't the kind of man who relaxed easily. His sister knew that. She'd booked him a window seat and texted him a list of things to do in the Okanagan that didn't involve physical training. He'd read the list once and put his phone away. The flight wasn't for another 2 hours, so he sat. He watched the room. Ghost breathed slow and steady beside him. That was enough. The Harwick family arrived the way wealthy people sometimes do in airports, as though the space had been built for them specifically and everyone else was in temporary occupation. There were 4 of them. The father, a broad man in his late 50s, moved with the confidence of someone who had not been told no in a very long time. His name was Douglas, and Caden clocked him the moment he came through the automatic doors. The way he walked, the way his gaze moved across the terminal, not to take it in, but to assess what belonged to him. The wife, Sylvain, was dressed in a way that suggested she'd changed for the airport, which meant she'd changed for strangers. Behind them came 2 adult sons, early 20s, both built like they'd spent their teenage years in private gym facilities and hadn't done much since. One was on his phone, the other was watching his father. They were heading toward the priority seating area near Gate 14. So was someone else. Her name was Penny. She was in her early 40s, dark-haired, slight, moving her manual wheelchair with the practiced efficiencies of someone who'd been doing it for years. She had a canvas bag over the back of the chair and a laptop case across her lap, and she was clearly heading for the same stretch of open seating near the window, the accessible section, the part of the terminal where the chairs had been removed to make room for people who didn't use them. She got there first. Douglas Harwick stopped. He looked at the space, he looked at Penny, he looked at his wife and then at his sons with an expression that communicated, without words, that this was an inconvenience and that inconveniences were something other people dealt with. "Excuse me?" His voice was the kind of voice that expected to be obeyed. Not loud, just certain. Penny looked up from settling her bag. "This section is for priority passengers," Douglas said. "We're Platinum members." Penny held up her boarding pass. "I'm also a passenger. There are other seats. The accessible spaces are here. This is where I need to be." Douglas looked at her the way some people look at a piece of furniture that's in the wrong room. Something to be moved, not spoken to. "There's plenty of room at the other end of the terminal. I'm not moving," Penny said, evenly. Something shifted in his face. He didn't raise his voice, wasn't his style. He simply placed one hand on the back of Penny's wheelchair, on the handles, like it was his to touch, and said quietly to his son, "Move it." It happened fast. The son, the one who'd been watching his father, stepped forward and gripped the chair. Penny's hands came up from the wheels. She said something sharp. He yanked anyway, and the chair tilted, and then she was falling, and then she was on the floor. The bag went with her. The laptop case hit the ground. One wheel of the overturned chair was still spinning. The arrivals hall went very quiet. Some things you measure in seconds, some things you measure in heartbeats. Caden was already moving, not running, walking fast the way he'd been trained, controlled, deliberate. Ghost at his left heel without being told. 40 feet, 30. The crowd had formed a loose ring around the scene, that particular shape a crowd makes when it wants to watch, but doesn't want to be involved. He moved through it. He crouched beside Penny first. "Hey!" His voice was quiet. "Don't move yet. Let me look." She was on her side, one arm braced against the floor. Her face was tight with pain and something harder than pain, the particular expression of someone who has been humiliated in public and is deciding, in real time, whether to cry or whether to be furious. She chose furious. He understood. "I'm okay," she said. "Your shoulder hit first. I know. I felt it. Can you move your fingers?" She moved them. He nodded once. He stayed at her level, eye to eye, not looming. "I'm Caden. I'm going to help you back into the chair. Okay?" "Yes." He righted the wheelchair with one hand. Ghost stood a foot away, ears forward, watching the surrounding space, alert, still, doing exactly what he was trained to do. One of the onlookers, a woman with a toddler, had already pulled out her phone. She wasn't calling anyone, she was recording. Douglas had not moved. He was standing with his arms loosely crossed, watching Caden help Penny back into her chair, wearing the expression of a man who considers himself to be waiting for a misunderstanding to resolve itself. "She was blocking a priority access area," he said, "to no one in particular and everyone at once. We asked her to move and she fell." "She didn't fall," said Caden. He stood up. He was the same height as Douglas and in a different kind of shape. He said it the way you state a fact. No heat in it. Just precision. "Your son tipped the chair." "That's not what happened. 20 people saw it. I don't think you understand who you're talking to." Caden looked at him for a moment. Ghost sat down beside him, which was, in context, almost funny. "I understand exactly who I'm talking to," Caden said. "This is what money does, sometimes, in a conflict. It sends for reinforcements." Douglas had his phone out within 30 seconds. Not to call the police, to call someone above the police. A lawyer, maybe. A contact. Someone whose number was stored under a name that opened doors. He spoke quietly, turning slightly away, and when he turned back there was new certainty in his face. By the time 2 airport security officers arrived, Douglas Harwick had a version of the story ready. It was a version in which Penny had blocked a designated priority area and refused to comply with reasonable requests. It was a version in which his son had reached out to help, and she had become agitated and lost her balance. It was a version in which the large man now standing beside her had aggressively inserted himself into a private matter. And the dog was unleashed and aggressive in a public terminal. The officers looked at Ghost. Ghost was sitting down. His tail moved once. They looked at Caden. "Sir, we're going to need you to step back." Caden didn't argue. He stepped back. He kept his hands where they could be seen. He had spent a career understanding that the most dangerous thing you could do in a situation with unclear authority was make it worse before the facts were sorted out. "The woman," he said, "fell." Caden said, "Is right there. You could ask her. We'll get to that." They got to Douglas first. There is a particular unfairness that lands differently than other kinds. It's not the dramatic injustice of a film. It doesn't come with music. It comes quietly, with paperwork and professional politeness, and the particular tone that authority takes when it has decided, before speaking to you, whose side it's on. Caden was detained for causing a disturbance. Ghost was taken from him. That was the part that was hardest to watch, not because Ghost showed distress. He didn't, he was trained not to, but because of the way Caden's jaw tightened when the officer said it. A single visible thing in an otherwise still face. "He's a military working dog," Caden said. "He'll be held in the terminal security office. Standard procedure. He needs to stay with me." "Sir, please don't make this harder." Ghost looked back once as he was led away. Caden watched until he was out of sight. Then he sat down in the chair he was directed to sit in, put his hands on his knees and waited. Penny had been watching all of this. She was still near gate 14, her laptop bag recovered, her shoulder aching in a way that told her tomorrow was going to be unpleasant. A paramedic had come and gone after she declined further assessment. She had declined firmly because she had a 3 o'clock flight and because she was a physiotherapist who knew exactly what she'd done to her shoulder, and because she was not going to give Douglas Harwick the satisfaction of watching her be put on a stretcher. She rolled herself to where the security officer was standing near Caden. "Excuse me, ma'am, please." "He helped me," Penny said. "That man helped me, and his dog. While the man who tipped my chair is standing over there giving you his lawyer's phone number." The officer looked tired. "We're handling the situation." "Ma'am, you're handling the wrong person." "Ma'am." "My name," she said, with the particular calm of someone who is very controlled and very angry, "is Penny Ashford. I am a licensed physiotherapist. I travel this airport 4 times a year. I know the duty manager here by name, and I'm going to find her right now, and then I'm going to find everyone in this terminal who filmed what just happened. And then we are going to sit down together and talk about what actually occurred." She turned her chair and moved toward the information desk. The woman at the information desk was named Constance, but everyone who worked VYR knew her as Con. And Con had worked arrivals for 11 years, and she had never in 11 years seen what Penny described and not believed it. She made 2 calls. The first was to the duty manager, the second was to VYR security oversight. What happened next happened quickly, which is unusual for bureaucracies and airports, and situations involving expensive lawyers. But what had not been accounted for in Douglas Harwick's version of events was the woman with the toddler and her phone, and the older man near the coffee kiosk and his phone, and the teenager sitting against the window and her phone, and the fact that all 3 of them had been filming from different angles for different amounts of time, and none of them had stopped. The duty manager, a practical woman named Fiona, who had dealt with enough platinum members to be thoroughly unimpressed by them, reviewed the first video in under 4 minutes. Then she watched the second, then the third. She made a call upward. Caden sat in the security office and waited. He was good at waiting. Years of it, hurry up and wait, the military's oldest rhythm. He thought about Ghost and pushed the thought down. Ghost was fine. Ghost was always fine. A young security officer came in with a bottle of water, set it on the table. "You need anything else?" "My dog." The officer nodded like he understood something. He left. 20 minutes later, Ghost came back through the door. He walked directly to Caden and sat at his feet. Caden put one hand on the dog's head, briefly, and that was all. Ghost settled. 5 minutes after that, a different officer came in. Senior, by the way he carried himself. "Mr. Quinn, I apologize for the delay in getting the full picture." Caden looked at him. "There's some additional process we'll need to go through. But I want you to know that we have multiple video records of the incident, and the account provided by Mr. Harwick is inconsistent with what they show." "Inconsistent," Caden said. "Significantly." Caden picked up the water bottle. Drank. Set it back down. "How's the woman, Penny?" "She's with our duty manager. She's okay. Her shoulder took the impact. She's aware. She's managing." He almost smiled. He thought he might like Penny Ashford. Here is the thing about the truth in a world with cameras. It doesn't need you to remember it correctly. It simply waits. Douglas Harwick's lawyer arrived at the airport 40 minutes after the incident, by which time the duty manager had already contacted the airline. The airline had already flagged the Harwick family's account, and a formal report had been filed with the Vancouver Airport Authority. The lawyer, a man in a very good suit who looked like he was used to making problems smaller, reviewed the situation and did something unusual. He told Douglas to be quiet. Douglas was not accustomed to being told to be quiet by someone he was paying. He expressed this loudly. in a priority lounge where 4 other Platinum members were now watching with their phones out. His lawyer said quietly, "There are 3 videos, Douglas." Douglas stopped talking. The formal review happened not in a dramatic courtroom but in a meeting room in the airport's administrative wing, 14 days later, before a civil tribunal convened by the airport authority. It was not the end of the process. There would be further legal proceedings. But it was the first formal accounting. Penny was there. She'd brought nothing. No notes, no prepared statement. She sat in her wheelchair with her hands in her lap and answered questions precisely and without embellishment. Caden was there in his uniform. Not for effect. Because he'd been asked to provide a formal witness account, and he'd decided, after thinking about it, that he wanted Douglas Harwick to understand exactly what kind of man had been in that terminal. Ghost sat at his feet under the table, the tribunal chair. A retired judge named Walter Ossie had a reputation for 2 things: impatience with prepared speeches and extreme attention to specifics. He was going to be appropriate for this. Douglas arrived with 2 lawyers and the confidence of a man who still believed the situation was retrievable. That confidence lasted approximately 11 minutes. The videos were reviewed. The first, shot by the woman with the toddler, showed the approach, the exchange, Douglas placing his hand on Penny's chair, and his son gripping it. 42 seconds of footage, clear, stable, no ambiguity. The second, from the older man near the kiosk, caught the moment of the tipping from a different angle, and showed clearly that Penny's hands had been on the wheels, that she had been holding on, that the force required to overturn the chair had been deliberate. The third video, from the teenager, had caught Douglas's expression immediately after Penny fell. Walter Ossie watched that one twice. He did not comment on it. He didn't need to. Caden gave his account in the same tone he'd use in a debrief, sequential, factual, precise. He did not editorialize. He did not need to. The facts editorialized themselves. When Douglas's lawyer began a line of questioning suggesting that Caden had escalated the situation by inserting himself aggressively, Walter paused him. The record indicates that Mr. Quinn crouched beside the injured woman and checked her condition. Is that correct? He created a confrontation. Is it correct that he crouched beside her first? Yes. And that his dog was seated throughout the interaction? A pause. And that he was asked to step back by security and did so immediately. A longer pause. Yes, continue, said Walter. The lawyer did not continue that line of questioning. Douglas Harwick did not take the stand. His lawyer had advised against it, and for once Douglas listened. But the absence of his testimony in the face of 3 video records and 2 first-hand accounts created its own kind of statement. His son, the one who had tipped the chair, was questioned directly. He was 23, he was not, Caden had come to understand, a bad person by nature. He was a person who had spent his entire life watching his father encounter obstacles and remove them, and he had learned to do the same without questioning whether removal was appropriate. That was not an excuse, but it was a thing. The son answered 3 questions and then said, in a voice that had gone small and flat, "He told me to move it." His lawyer touched his arm. He stopped. It was enough. The tribunal's findings were not a verdict. That would come in the civil proceedings Penny had already initiated. But the findings were clear, and they were formal, and they were the kind of document that follows a family name for a long time. The Harwick family's priority membership with the airline was suspended pending review. The airport authority issued a formal incident report. Douglas's name and the event were documented. His lawyer used the word disproportionate once in a final note of objection. Walter Ossie looked at him over his glasses. A woman was put on the floor in a public terminal, he said. A man who intervened to help her was detained. His service animal was confiscated. I am struggling to identify what proportionate would have looked like. The lawyer said nothing. The meeting ended. Outside, in the corridor, Penny found Caden at the coffee machine. He was staring at it like he hadn't decided yet. "It doesn't make good coffee," she said. "Worse than Tim Hortons, different kind of bad. He made it anyway." Ghost sat between them, looking at the machine with what might have been professional skepticism. "Thank you," Penny said. "For all of it." He looked at her. "You held your own." "I had help. You would have been fine." She thought about that. She thought about being on the floor of the terminal, laptop case beside her, the sound the chair had made going over. She thought about the moment before Caden reached her, when she'd been looking up at the ceiling of the airport and understanding that nobody was coming. And then someone had come. "Maybe," she said, "but it matters that someone showed up." He nodded, once, picked up his terrible coffee. Ghost stood, shook himself, and leaned briefly against Penny's wheel. Not trained behavior, just dog behavior, the kind that's not taught. And she reached down and put her hand on his head for a moment. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. Outside the administrative wing, the airport continued the way airports do, indifferent, enormous, full of people in transit between places that mattered to them. Flights were called, bags were loaded. A child ran across the departures hall and was caught by a grandfather who swung him up and held him like he was the most important thing in the building, because he was. Caden walked back through departures toward his gate. His flight to Kelowna was in an hour. His sister had texted 3 times. She had seen something on the local news, a brief clip, the back of a man in a terminal, a large dog. She didn't know it was him. He hadn't told her yet. He thought about how he would explain it. He thought maybe he wouldn't explain much. His sister would ask, and he would say it was nothing, just a thing that happened. And she would look at him with the particular expression she'd been giving him since they were kids. The one that said she knew he was editing. And then she'd feed him dinner. And his niece would try to convince Ghost to wear a small hat, and that would be that. Some things don't need to be made into more than they were. A woman needed help. He helped her. The truth came out the way truth does, slowly and then all at once. That was the whole of it. Ghost walked beside him through the terminal, unhurried, ears moving at sounds Caden couldn't hear, reading the room the way he always did. People moved aside, not from fear, just from the instinctive recognition that some things carry weight. They found their gate. Caden sat down. Ghost lay across his feet. Outside the floor-to-soiling windows, a plane lifted off the runway and climbed into a flat gray Vancouver sky. Caden watched it until it disappeared into the cloud. 14 days. First one in almost 2 years. He closed his eyes. As your narrator, I can tell you that the rest of the story is quieter. That's how real stories usually end. Not with a final dramatic scene, but with ordinary things resuming. Penny filed her civil suit. The proceedings were not fast, but they moved. Douglas Harwick hired 2 more lawyers and achieved, in the end, the kind of settlement that is not called a loss, but that everyone involved understands is won. And in Kelowna, a man who hadn't slept more than 4 hours at a time in over a year slept 8. In a small room next to a dog who had done his job and knew it. While outside the window the Okanagan Hills sat still and green in the morning. And the only urgent thing was breakfast, and that could wait.